Hey guys, welcome back to the Spruce and Linen channel. I'm Janelle and today we're going to be working on this Christmas sweater inspired woven wall hanging. So let's get started. This video is brought to you by the Spruce and Linen shop where you can find weaving looms, kits, tools, and supplies. Link in the description box below. This is the pattern that we're going to be working on today. It is an overshot pattern, just in the sense that between every row we are doing tabby with our warp. So for my warp today, I've actually used this Bernat Handicrafter, I believe it is. It's 100% cotton. It's a little bit thicker than my usual warp string. The reason I'm doing this, and I've gotten this question a few times lately, and that's like, how do you decide when to use a thin warp and when to use a thicker warp? So for a pattern like this, where the warp is kind of part of the pattern, so we're not squishing everything down to cover up our warp, I do like to use something a little bit thicker. Now, with any other type of woven wall hanging I'm doing, like when I'm doing anything with merino wool roving and I'm using chunky stuff and I don't really want the warp to stand out, that's where I'm going to use a thinner warp. I also really like my thin cotton or linen that I sell in the shop for really big pieces. It's plenty strong. It doesn't have a lot of stretch, so it's not going to make your piece shrink down near as much when you take it off the loom as something like this. So this does have a little bit more of a give, but it is still 100% cotton, so it's going to be significantly less stretchy than, say, this yarn. So you can see how much this has like quite a bounce to it. The other thing to consider is your loom's EPI, which is your ends per inch. Our Spruce and Linen loom is a 4 ends per inch loom, so it has the strings a little bit wider apart. And most frame looms are going to be in that range of kind of anywhere from 5 or 6 ends per inch to like 3 or 4 ends per inch. So this one is a 4, which I find good for most projects, but especially again when I'm doing this type of pattern, I do sometimes like a thicker warp. And part of this is just personal preference, but I always encourage you guys to, like, you do you, like, try out some different things and see what you like. I can always give you, of course, some recommendations like I am now, but lots of this is personal preference and there isn't necessarily a right and wrong way to do this. So anyway, now that we're done with that explanation, we're going to get started. So on my loom, I have 27 warp strings. Now this pattern is only 23 wide, so if we eliminate those two sidebars, so I left you the 2 extra rows on the sides just to show you, but the actual pattern is 23 rows wide. I added these 2 extra because I didn't want these words to be on the very end of the piece, so I decided to go with 2 extra strings on each side. So I have that on my loom now. I've got my cardboard in. I'm going to go in with my twining stitch at the bottom, a couple rows of plain weave, and then I'm going to put my fringe on. I'm using off-white. Of course, a project like this would also look really pretty as a mixed fringe. You could mix, you know, the 3 colors that you're using. And as far as the other yarns that I'm using, these red and green ones are Loops and Threads Cozy Wool. This one I believe is Moss, and this one is Merlot. And then this is just Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick. So any bulky yarn or super bulky yarn will work just fine for this project. If you don't have a super thick yarn, you can always double or triple up your yarn to create your own bulky yarn. So let's get started. To start off this weaving, I'm going to just be going in with a row of tabby with the off-white yarn and then a row of tabby with the same yarn I'm using for the warp. Since this is a overshot pattern and we're always going in with that tabby between our rows, I wanted to just keep that look even though this is just a plain weave section. So I have my 3 rows of the off-white chunky yarn in there, and I'm just gonna go back in with that 3rd row of the cotton yarn. So you can see that sometimes I really stretch and pull at this because if I notice it drawing in, I'm just gonna try to correct that and make sure that I'm not weaving too tight. And we're going to get started with our pattern now. So if you haven't checked out our other pattern tutorials, I will stick in the diamond twill one as well as the first overshot one I did. So that's going to give you a more in-depth explanation, and it's just a more in-depth tutorial. So if you're brand new to overshot or twills in general, definitely check out those two videos. I'll put links in the description box below, and I'll put a link up here for the first overshot one. But basically what we're doing here is that we have two different colors on our pattern here, and every colored block represents going over one warp string. And you can see here we have some green and some red. So on this very first row, we are actually going to put in both colors before we go back in with our tabby. And with an overshot, we are doing our pattern rows and then going back in with a row of tabby. Again, in this case, I'm using the same yarn as I used in my warp, and I'm using that in the weft as well. So we're gonna just get started here. I'm going to go in with the red first. So this is one of the few times I'm actually going to be weaving with 3 needles at once. But if you only have 2, that's totally fine. You just have to switch one out. And if you have 1, you can also do that. But since I have 3, I'm going to use 3. So I'm starting with my red, and we're going to once again be covering up all the other rows so we can just focus on this one. Remembering that we do have 2 extra warp strings on each side, serving as our floating warp slash a bit of a border around the actual pattern. Since this is our very first row and I have quite a few rows of red, I don't want to just start out in the middle here with the red. So I'm going to go over 1 string, under 1 string, then over 1, then we have under 5, over 1, under 1, over 1, under 5, over 1, under 1, over 1, under 5, over 1, and then I'm just repeating what I did here. So I'm going under 1 of the floating warp strings and then over the other. And that is our very first row. That is half of our first row, I should say. Now then, before we go in with the tabby, we're going to go in with the green. So with the green, I'm not going to go all the way to the edge because I've already done that with the red. But for this one, we're going under 5, over 1, then under 7, and over 1, under 5, under 7, over 1, and then we're just going under the rest. So now we can beat that down. And now that we're done our 2 colors in that first row, we can go back in with our tabby. Now for pattern type weavings like this, I don't like to beat down super tightly. I like to have everything resting and touching each other, but you don't need to push it down because that's going to basically shrink your pattern. So the harder you beat, the more pushed down that pattern is going to look. So since in this section we don't have green again till up here, I am going to cut this piece, leave yourself a tail, and just let that hang out there while we continue on with the red. So now it's the second row here. And in this case, we're going under 2. So this was going over this one, so now I need to go under. So under 2, over 2, under 3, over 2, under 1, over 2, under 3, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 3, over 2, and then we're going underneath the 2 at the end. And then again, I'm not beating down super tightly. I'm letting that just rest on the yarns previous. So now we're ready to go back in with our tabby again. So everything's gonna look the same now, just the edges are going to look a little bit different on each row. So now, since I came under that far string, I'm gonna go over, under, over 3, under 1, over 3, under 1, over 3, and it's just the same thing all the way across. Under 1, over 3, under 1, over 3, under 1, over 3, under 1, over 1. I'm going to continue on with this pattern until we get to the ho 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 section, because we are doing something slightly different here. So just continue on that exact same way, following your pattern. When you get to the 2 color sections, remember just to do both colors and then the tabby afterwards. All right, so now we're done the first section. So I'm going to go back in doing just maybe even only 1 row, we'll see what it looks like, of the chunky off-white yarn, just to kind of break up the sections. So again, going opposite of the previous tabby row that we just did with the cotton. And again, back with the cotton. So I think I like the way that looks with just the 1 row of the white there, and I'm just gonna make sure that everything is looking kind of straight here. So I'm going to just leave it at that 1 row of the white, off-white cotton. And then we're going to go in with the ho 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 section. And something that I'm doing a little bit differently with this is I'm actually going to double up my bulky yarn for this part. When I tried this the first time, I found that the lettering was disappearing a little bit, but I didn't want there to be extra rows. So one way to just make it look a little bit more substantial is to double up the yarn. So that's what we're going to do. So I have 2 strands of that, and then everything else is the same. So now we go like this. We're going to be starting with our, because this is the start of the green, you're going to go over 1, under 1, over 3, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 3, and then that again, over 3, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1. So that is the beginning of the lettering here. And I'm just going to try to make sure that these are lined up nicely. So again, this is just to bulk up that lettering so that it looks extra, that you really notice it and you can read it really easily. So again, going back in with our tabby. And in this section, our tabby is going to kind of disappear. And that's what we want, because we want these letters to come out really clearly. So now we can scooch up, and then everything else from here on out is just exactly the same as we did before. So again, we're gonna go under 2 to start, over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1, and then this section is actually mainly plain weave. The only difference is that I did go under 2 at the start, but the rest of the row is plain weave. So this section I am going to be beating down a little bit more tightly, just so that our letters are going to show up really well. So now once again, we're going back in with this off-white yarn and just doing 1 row of tabby here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and loop this back around since we started on an under, just so it's got a nice finish there. And then the last section of this weaving is exactly the same as the beginning. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll meet here at the end. To end this off, I'm going to do 2 rows of plain weave, again with the cotton in between, with the off-white yarn again. And then we're going to end with a twining stitch just to make sure everything is nice and secure, and then we can get this on the dowel and off of the loom. So if you haven't done twining, I will stick a link in the description box below for the twining stitch as well, just so that you can head over to that video and quickly learn the twining stitch. Since we had an odd amount of strings and I want to actually hang this weaving from the loops, I'm going to create a loop with this very last string. Often with twills and overshot, to make everything symmetrical, it will be an odd amount of warp strings, but it's really not a big deal if you want to hang it from the loop. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of weave this through my twining, or stitch it through. I'm going to make sure that these loops are very close to the same length. So that looks pretty good there. And then all I'm going to do is tie a knot around a warp string that is close to this one. So you want to be careful not to pull anything super, super tight to start with, because we don't want to change that loop size. So that looks pretty good there. And then I'm just simply going to do one more knot. And now we have an extra loop on the end. So that's an easy way to make your odd amount of warp strings into even just for the hanging process, but still have that really symmetrical weave that I definitely prefer when it comes to overshot and twill and all of those kinds of things. Trim off the end there. Then I'm going to flip it the right way around. And we're going to hang this the same way I've shown you quite a bit lately, and that is just directly from the loops. So, and it looks like, oh, it looks like I did something funny there, but I'm not going to worry about that now. So all you're going to do, start on one end, flip your loop forward, bring these around, creating one loop, and stick it around your dowel. And I'm just going to do that all the way across. So open your loop, flip it forward, bring the other 2 loops together to create one, and put it around your dowel. So now I'm going to tie my hanging string, and you can use the warp string, you can use other string. I'm just going to use the same cotton I used for the warp string just so it all ties together. All right, so I'm just gonna go clean up the fringe and then we are all done. All right, you guys, so here is the finished piece and I think it's so cute. We've got the Christmas sweater vibes, we've got that ho 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 in there, and I just think this is such a fun little festive piece. It's not too loud. Of course, if you wanted to make it more colorful, you absolutely can. Like I said, I think this would be really pretty with a mixed fringe as well, because I love mixed fringe, you guys know this. And you could easily do, instead of 3 strands of the off-white, you could do 1 off-white, 1 red, and 1 green just to switch it up. You could do completely different colors than I did. I can't wait to see your guys' versions of this. And again, the pattern link will be in the description box below. You guys, guys, so I hope you love this piece as much as I do. I think it's just a really fun one, another pattern to follow. And of course, I can't wait to see the different color combinations you guys come up with. So definitely tag me on Instagram at Spruce and Linen, and you can use hashtag SL Weaving Club so I can see and share your work there as well. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell to get notifications when I post new videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.